begin, before we get into the discussion, I'm just going to hand over and let you guys introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Dan Hinkis. I have a music app for making music that anyone can use to make music with your app, with my app.
My name is Manuel Richter. I'm running Leap Audio. It was originally a workshop series. Now we are a brand building music instruments, and I run an online shop called Exploding Shed. We distribute DIY kits all over Europe.
He said exploding shed, not exploding shit. Yeah, just to make clear.
So, and I'm a musician, and I do things, creative things.
Hi everybody, I'm Valerio Velato. I'm the co-founder and CEO of NanoDrive. NanoDrive, we do AI music consulting, and my background is both in science and I'm a musician as well, and I basically do the PhD in AI music, bringing together these two things very well. That's it.
Hi Paul, and I work for Factory Berlin, which is I think one of the biggest entrepreneur communities in Europe, and my role is actually focusing more on the creative industry. So I think Factory is actually home to Palam and also Gad, you guys. So no, not true.
Oh yeah, a little bit.
Yeah. So we're kind of focusing on building a community around any kind of entrepreneur, but bringing together a variety of different players in the end. So entrepreneurs, but also corporates, freelancers, and so my focus is more bringing in more the creative scene as well.
Hi, I'm Edwin. I'm the CEO of Playground. We have a remix app. Does it work?
Yeah.
I'm the CEO of Playground. We have a remix app on the App Store, and we help anyone who, no matter how skilled he is or knowledgeable about music he is, to make awesome music.
Hi, I'm Kalam. I've spent the last few months in rooms full of artists explaining how I'm not an artist, so this room doesn't actually matter. I work with artists to explore new forms of expression using AI and mixed reality, based in the Creators Lab at Factory. And yeah, I fell into this space after working in a company called Native Instruments, working on a lot of innovation topics there, and prior to that setting up accelerators at independent music labels in London to help startups do their business in music.
I'm just going to keep this. So, last but not least, my name is Ray. I am part of the team behind Sample Music Festival. There I am responsible basically for everything that hits your eyes. So I do a lot of the design, I do a lot of the installations at the events themselves. And I think like everybody else here, I push buttons for a living. So everything that has got to do with graphics and sound, that's my game. And yeah, so the thing is, we live in very interesting times right now. The industry over the last decade has done a lot of amazing stuff, but at the same time, now this is my personal opinion, I want you guys to chime in on this. I believe that there is a lot of interesting stuff happening in the industry, but there isn't a whole lot of education going on. So what I have observed as a professional nerd is that we have a lot of technologies with a lot of potential, but a lot of people have no idea how to use them. And I think that most of the really interesting stuff isn't happening in the core industry themselves. Huge brands like Native Instruments in music, which owns basically half the Pioneer and so on, they are all following established paths. Many times, not Native Instruments, mind you, they are one of the few ones left experimenting, but basically we're reiterating concepts, yeah? So every year you see a whole bunch of DJ controllers that all sort of look the same. And each of them is supposedly a game changer and something revolutionary, but they're really not. And meanwhile, in the startup industry or in the startup crowd, the really interesting stuff happens. Like people who come to us at Sample Music Festival, such as Playground, they bring the new stuff. They help democratize creating music and performing music. So we've spoken to many of these people over the years, and there are certain challenges associated with starting anything new that doesn't follow established as in every industry, really. So could you guys perhaps tell a little bit of your story? What were your experiences with that? And feel free to start with whomever. And also, hold on, so just before we get into it, most of these guys here, including myself, are huge nerds. Okay, we've been doing this stuff for about half our lives. So if you have any sort of questions, like according to the schedule, the FAQ and everything, the Q&A is going to be at the end of the thing. But if you have any questions, just do the thing that you did in school, interrupt us, ask questions, ask us to talk more about something, explain things, okay? So no shame in anything. We all started somewhere. I don't know anything personally.
Can I just say, I find the term button pusher extremely offensive. And I'm actually a glass swiper.
Okay. I apologize for offending your identity. Good sir. We shall continue.
Yeah, I don't know really where to start, but with actually the Playground app is it comes from more than 10 years of research and development into pushing live electronic music boundaries. And the idea was that we wanted to break free from the computer and stop being like in control of the music in the same way that the guitarist is at the control of his music. And having instruments you are playing and not just writing the music in the software and then the software make the shows. And Playground is really the end of that journey. And so we brought a completely new interface, and we thought that it was so easy that everyone would be able to play with it. And it's been a huge challenge for us because we just took the barrier of entry very low, but it's still too high for most of people. Because if you don't have already a trained musical ear, you don't know how to play, and that's something that we struggled a lot to how to teach people how to play even very simple instruments, because there's an analogy I do all the time to explain that. It's if I give you a bunch of letters, you won't be able to write a sentence. If I give you a lot of sentences, you might be able to make something that makes sense, but you won't write a novel. And that's where we go. And then we still have to teach people how to build something more that makes sense, and it's really a challenge. And besides maybe Melodics, who I think do a very good job in helping people understand music theory in a very easy way, there's not much things.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying is that as methods of creating and performing music evolve, the human-machine interface changes, the instruments change, and there is an issue with communicating the way a certain new interface and approach works.
Well, I think I'm the least music tech nerd in this round. So if there's any questions around that, please ask the other ones. But for me, which is actually how I experienced the change of the industry so far, is mostly, I mean, you have kind of like these waves of new technology coming in, and then it's democratizing. So when I got into music, it was kind of like these producers sitting in a $1 million studio who would produce a hit, and now there's actually a kid with a laptop who can do the same. And now there's maybe AI thrown at us, which now is super complicated and something even like really nerds can really create really decent output with. But this might also democratize in the future. Maybe Kalam can say more about this. But so that's why I think it's super interesting to kind of bring all these people together and evolve even from other industries. And that's why I think it's always good to have a connection with players who are maybe not musicians necessarily. I mean, we can see that AI is way more advanced in telling you what to shop or telling you what you're looking for on the internet, and not necessarily how to create a song. But this might change. But so that's what I mean. I think the most interesting part about creative communities, not necessarily only music, is to really connect with each other. So don't only talk to musicians, but also talk to some other artists maybe even talk to someone who's working in blockchain. And that's why I think that's what we try to do, to really connect players from very different fields and creative, very smart people who you can interact with and learn from. And I think, from my point of view, kind of like this age of this one person just sitting in his own studio and just being nerdy by himself is kind of over, because you definitely get more inspiration from learning from other people, I think.
Well, first of all, it's interesting the composition we have on stage. So we have the tech people, and then we have the community people, which are connecting the people and the technology. And I think in the end, it's really about music and music technology, especially, I think, is a lot about reconnecting us in a way to our humanity and to each other. So there's all different ways how humans connect to each other, and part of my personal story and my product is really around what is the function of music for humans, why did humans invent music in the first place, and as I see it, it's a lot about bringing culture together, homogenizing a culture. In every culture on earth, in every religion, you have some sort of communal musical experience in its center, and it's interesting to see like how music and these new tools that are arising now. If you think about it, for example, like how long did it take from the first guitar? How long did it take to reach the state of a guitar as we see it today? It took like thousands of years, probably. Different small variations. And now we're in a place in time in history where you can create a new type, completely new kind of instrument in a month. You can prototype something. So with these digital technologies. So I think utilizing new technologies to do what music is meant to do, that is to connect people around music, is something that is kind of like an interesting moment in time.
I think what's interesting is these new inventions and stuff which is coming up. On one hand, it's very impressive, yes. On the other hand, all these devices are dumber than in the 90s. For example, I had a MIDI controller in the 90s from PV. You could compose a MIDI string by yourself, bit by bit, on the machine. So now all these fancy controllers, basically they are nothing. They need a host, they need a brain to be connected to, or having a function at all. Otherwise they're completely useless. So there are two sides. This is one side, and on the other side, it's super impressive what you can do with all that stuff. So what's also happening is in all these mainstream, I think this kind of innovation thing never really came from the mainstream. And there are more and more things, there's more and more sounds and sound banks and whatever, gigabytes over gigabytes. And sometimes it all sounds the same. Everybody's doing the same music, but we're all humans, and we're all, what you said, connected to being human. And what's your, what's the reason why you do music? What's the feeling behind it? So what do you want to reach? What kind of feeling? What do you want to express? And yeah, you can do it with a lot of technology and stuff. It's possible, but
You can also do it with a hammer and smash.
Right, you're right. By end of the 80s, I was listening to Einstürzen in Neubau, for example, for the first time. And it was these scratching sounds. This was so appealing to me. It was I was a kid, and it was frightening me. On the same time, I was super fascinated by it. And then over years and years, it became a feeling inside myself. And I started to express it, the same thing, kind of recreating the stuff which was taken in years before. And yeah, you not always need big technology for this.
Maybe just one remark on this. I mean, I totally agree, and However, I think it's kind of like in any other industry, right? You're saying the innovation comes from not from the big players or the mainstream, but from startups. And I think it's kind of the same in any industry. I mean, all the Spotifys and whatever companies come up from being a startup, and it's the same in any industry. That's why sometimes I feel it's kind of weird how we treat kind of like all the startup entrepreneur world, and then there's the music world, which somehow seems to be different, which I think is not that much, because startups in the end are the ones who are driving innovation, and it's not the, I don't know, universal music necessarily who's driving innovation in the end.
Yes, I think that there's a balance that the industry is trying to strike between breaking even, basically, and experimenting. And there's, of course, every company will have a different R&D budget. So sometimes there have been over the last decade, I think, at least two major things that came from the mainstream industry. In this case, Ableton introduced Link, Link is basically a thing that allows you to synchronize mobile devices. So if you work with music apps, it's open source. You can implement it on anything, and you can basically jam with your friends if you're just connected to the same network. That's number one, and I think that was pretty successful. That's a thing that the industry introduced. And it's everywhere now. It's in my VJ software, so I can synchronize, I don't know, my DJ stuff, my live set, my VJ stuff. It's all beat synced. Another thing I think that was a little bit less successful was Native Instruments Stems, which was an attempt to introduce a new new music format, where you would have multiple tracks in a single file. So you could, as a DJ, you could say, I'm going to take out the beat, I'm going to take out the bass, I'm just going to use the a cappella, like the vocal track. And unfortunately, in my opinion, it wasn't very successful, but not every innovation necessarily comes from the underground and the people who spent the last 20 years in the basement scratching or finger drumming or something. So I think there is a balance between that. But what I myself observed is that the whole, with democratizing, which is a word I think at least 3 people in this discussion used, we sort of come full circle musically, because we started by bashing rocks together, then we kind of went into more modern interfaces, and then sort of what we're trying to do now is dumb down this, no offense to anybody using these apps, like dumb down, simplify these concepts, like the huge potential that we have with technology, the many kinds of synthesis and etc. We're trying to reduce that to an interface that will be easier to use to understand for humans, to sort of maybe get them into it, help them unleash their ideas. So what? Hello. Christmas pass, whatever. So what do you guys think? Like, do you think there should be? What's your take on education? Because I believe if we keep simplifying things, that's again just my personal opinion. If we keep simplifying things forever, the number of people who will actually want to explore, hack, and learn what's happening behind this beautiful, easy-to-use interface is going to shrink, and ultimately we're all, I don't know. That's my question to you guys. Perhaps that would be.
Yeah. So I come obviously from kind of like biased point to this table here, which is like that of like AI, and what I believe that AI is doing right now, like in the music tech, or it will do like over the next like 5-10 years. I don't know precisely, obviously, but instead of like opening up like new opportunities to people who want to create music and democratizing like that process. But at the same time, this is not something that we've seen like only like now. This is like, if you think about that, is we have a sort of like instinct like for music, which is that of expressing ourselves through music, and that has been going on for thousands, if not like tens of thousands of years. I remember that like the first instrument was like found, and I think like here in Germany in a cave. It was kind of like bone flute, and it was like traced back to 40,000 more or less like years ago. So there's always been this necessity to express ourselves, and what we've done throughout time is the idea of like building like new tools, new bone flutes, more proficient bone flutes to express ourselves. And if we do like a huge jump like in time, if you think about like the invention like of the orchestra or acoustic instruments, that's what it is like in the end. It's just like moving forward, expressing ourselves like even more. And but before like the 20th century, I would say like there was like a huge disconnect between the creators and the experiencers, right? So you had the Mozarts, the Beethoven, the Wagners, who were like highly specialized, like music trained people who were able to amazingly like emit or like convey like their emotions. But then you had the audience, which was like the wider audience out there. Coming new technologies, like this has slightly changed over time. And if you think about like all the digital like innovations that we have had, and for example, like in the 80s, like with the advent of like software, DAWs, for example, so many more people all of a sudden could have access to music creation software. And I believe, like at this point in time, we are at a moment where like AI is like joining in.
Could you please elaborate to a more general audience the context of AI in music?
Yeah.
Just
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So like the idea like of AI music is basically like it works like on different levels. So there's a level which is like the pure like music generation. So basically we are using artificial intelligence to help us like create music, or just having like an AI that generates music by itself, completely without any input. But then we have another level, which is that's used by Spotify, for example. So we are using artificial intelligence for exploring music or for analyzing music. Well, I would argue that while like this latter version of AI music is now like fairly used, you have it in Spotify, you have it in Tidal, you have it like wherever really. So all the recommendation systems and things like that.
customers who bought also bought.
What's that, sorry?
Customers who bought also bought.
Yes, but even deeper than that.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
just like
Basically analyzing your mood and like understanding what kind of mood you are based on your like location
Yes.
and tracking and how many calls you're having,
yeah.
aligning that with the music that you're listening to, so that basically they're trying to make a huge map of what what music triggers what emotion, which and then try to push this music, because the hard truth is that every weekend there's like 50,000 pieces of songs released every day. So sorry, every weekend at least. Just in electronic music, I think it's like 15,000 tracks every weekend. There's so much music in the world, and people don't know what to do with it. They need algorithms and machine learning to try and direct it to the right people. Now, I think it's a waste of time, because I think that the emotional complexity of music is so personal. It's so related to your taste that you acquired actually from your bigger sister, or from the cool kid in class. I don't think I think like, and the way people interpret music emotionally is actually extremely personal. So I think like that there's some bottleneck issues in this attempt to map out human emotions, although it does seem to work for sure if you're trying to sell stuff. So, or like target specific things. I'm sure there's something there, but but I'm a bit of on the AI skeptic side on this stage, as far as music. Yeah.
Yeah, but as you said, there is like so much music released every day. Probably, I think I read it's around like 40,000 tracks like on Spotify every day, which is incredible, right? So now imagine that you want to like filter out the music that you may care about, right? So you can't do that like by yourself. So you need like an extra help. Now, obviously, it's not going to work like 100% perfectly, but that's not. Even if there was like a human being doing the same thing, it wouldn't be like perfect, like for sure.
Yeah.
But like the point being is that we can now, like with certain algorithms, like approximate more or less like your taste, and try like to give you like some music, for example, that you may be like interested in.
So I guess two things that I wanted to comment. First of all, like I'll get back to that in a second, but I'm not sure if that's what you meant, but I think that before the record industry was existing even, people were much more musically active or literate. Because it was, and the longer you look back in history actually, the more you see that music was an everyday part of culture. So
not necessarily. So if you go back to like the 19th century or the 18th century, for example, well, the music was part of the everyday life of noble people. Not
the music
like,
that you know about that was noted, but not the music that people were jamming with a harmonica. So I'm not talking about classical, I'm talking about folk music.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's a fair point. But the problem is like the access that we have to music like right now, I guess order of magnitude like bigger than what we used to have even like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, right?
So 10 years ago, 15 years ago for sure. But I think one of the tragedies of the last 100 or so years is that music was kind of deprived from us as active participants in music. And we were sold this idea that music is for them. Who's them? The talented, the beautiful, the rich, whatever. But that's bullshit. Like 90% of all human beings, if you can nod your head and if you can clap at a concert, you're making music.
Yeah,
That's the basics. And I think that the value that you can receive from engaging in music on a personal level and on a level of society, to be active in music is just too good to give up. And I think that's one of the big potentials of the technology. And even if it's like machines are dumber, or maybe the people are dumber, but maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe all that matters is that you have a good connection and that you're like releasing some oxytocin in your brain and it makes you feel
So
good.
you're hugging your mobile devices? Oxytocin?
Well, I sleep next to them, don't you? Like,
Okay, so my question would be, if we're starting from that vantage point, if you want to truly go in that direction, how facilitate that? There was a lot of well, basically R&D effort and expenses that go into that. And I'm interested, Kalam, what do you think? What are your experiences with brands that take risks like that genuinely explore stuff, go down paths that we haven't walked down before?
don't hug the mic all the time. Just
I'll try not to. It's funny because I know pretty much everyone here you from past interactions, both on a professional level and on a personal level, and this question of what the innovators are doing and where that fits into what you're trying to achieve in a company was pretty much my day job. And I think there's no simple way of describing this, but I think it's when you're sitting inside a company with 500 to 600 employees and 3 major product lines, there's very little time in the teams creating products to indulge in what startups are doing. They might be impressed by what you're doing, but it's quite outside of what they're working towards, which is a product development cycle where you have a persona that you're developing towards, and you have a product that fits that, and you have this very complex process of going from features that you want to add to the next thing and getting it shipped. So there's a lot of reasons to say no, and which I'm sure you guys have experienced, not just with the companies we're speaking of here. But what's interesting is that you found a way to tap into audiences that maybe those companies can't naturally access because they're very focused on a particular type of customer who tends to be the one who parts with money to get a really special piece of kit that's very complex. And what's interesting about, let's say, Playground and what you're doing, Gad, with Jamble, is like these apps are very much I call it a thumb first experience because it is literally you're making music with your thumb. That's what it is. And it's just so much fun to play around with these apps. And it's so encouraging to see that these things get so much traction, have such interesting interfaces that companies cannot create themselves. I mean, they can conceive of, but it doesn't become a product. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's just what it's like. It's just there's this tension between the very creative startup. Now, the second thing that I'd like to point out here is like, you know, music tech and the whole startup journey. We've been in this for 10 years. Like raising money is fucking hard. Raising money is fucking hard for you too. You just cost a little bit of money, but it's a different world. It's not you know, Another Drive talking to investors. They don't get it. It's just they just see a music startup, niche market, niche within a niche, and I think the thing about music, making music or being creative, the thing that you kind of alluded to here, was just like there's something about all of us. We might get in front of a keyboard, or we might get in front of our laptops and indulge ourselves in something, whether it's Minecraft or whether it's making music. There's something in us that gets triggered by making, and that's quite a universal experience. And so these apps, if you try them, you'll find they're a lot of fun. You probably want to go deeper, and you probably want to explore them further. But I think this is not something that is a straight line to make it a track that goes on Spotify and goes into the charts. It is actually more of a broader experience that we have, which is to make things and to indulge ourselves a little and grow as individuals. I'm not quite sure where that came up, but to go back to AI, I think what's interesting about, if you look at these tech stacks, so you have these hyper-complex music-making tools that two companies in Berlin make. And then you have two startups here that try and address the fact that that stuff is too complex. So you create a really nice interface on an iPad app or an iPhone app that allows people to make music and share that stuff with other people. And then you have this next wave, which is now facilitated by a much more accessible processing power, where you can actually take lots of data, put it into a machine, and out comes, with some careful curation and a lot of hard work, out comes something that you listen to and it's sonically coherent. It sounds like music. It's pretty interesting. And that's where I fall into this area. It's quite interesting for me to see all of these opportunities for people to make music, but specifically from an artist perspective, with the complex technologies we have today, like specifically AI and its reach and the stories around what it can or cannot do. It's fascinating to see the artists in the residency in the factory, for example. There are 25 artists. They're characterized. They're called hybrid artists because their work goes beyond just creating music or digital media. They are also scientists. They're also researchers. Some of them have PhDs. You have a PhD. You know, they're bringing in multiple disciplines. They don't fit into this persona that many companies have of a bedroom music producer or a pro music producer. They are people who take all these tools and come up with something that challenges your assumptions about what this thing can be, but it also can be beautiful. It can be, you might experience it as the visuals in the back of an artist that you see, like 9 Inch Nails. You might see the generative visuals behind them and think, wow, that's amazing. That came from an artist in the residency here. You might go onto Instagram and use an AR filter, and that AR filter might have hundreds of millions of impressions and tens of millions of shares. That came from an effect developer. We've got about 5 of them in this program. Those are creators. Those are the new wave of creators that we have today. And they sit alongside the same people who create dome experiences at some of the biggest festivals in the world, create background light effects in concerts, and also create Grammy-winning award albums. These are the people who are making stuff right now, and their disciplines just span across multiple areas. And I think this is what I see right now, is like this, all of this stuff is fascinating, because you could tap into someone who has never experienced what it's like to scratch or to make music. They may go on to use your app within a broader experience where the data coming out of that is feeding into a visual that is generated based on what's coming out of it. That might become the next big music video. There's just a really big open palette out there I see today, and many of the startups are sort of like sitting in there allowing such interaction to happen. And that's also another reason why investors get scared, because they don't really know where what you're doing is going. But they do know that on the music publishing side, there's one business model that now dominates everything, that some people see as quite destructive unless you're very successful. On the music creation side, however, there's a whole bunch of things happening. There's direct downloads, you can buy stuff from the companies directly. You can make stuff yourself if you're good at Max MSP. There's a lot of room for experiment, but it makes it super fragmented. But that fragmentation is a strength, actually. It means that there's so much cool stuff that coexists. Gad, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I actually find like interesting connecting point between the like AR, more generative side of the music tech and the more democratization side, which might be interesting to think about, which is basically if you think there's, as we said, there's more and more music being released all the time. If we are successful at our attempt, then that's gonna be like 100 times more because people are gonna generate these small, short pieces of music. Everyone complains.
Are they gonna release it though? Sorry.
Huh?
Are they gonna release it?
No, but it doesn't matter. It's no, I don't. It doesn't. They can release it. Actually, everything can be automatically licensed. Everything, all the copyrights can be put on the blockchain. And we actually talked today with a company that can evaluate fingerprint user-generated music. Fingerprint, so it analyzes the data. Let's say one of my users makes a beat. They put it on YouTube. So a machine can recognize that, oh, that was created with my app, and can if that video became a huge success, the user that created this music can monetize. And actually, it can be also used for a commercial or for another creator. So there's all these things that are happening, and I think one of the common denominator is music is turning back from a medium that stays, that is like eternal, like a Beatles record will never change, but maybe music is going back to something momentary. Because there's this huge, immense flow of music in the ether and technology, people are sharing with each other. It's not so much about anymore Beyonce, it's more about my neighbor, or like the girl I like in class, and the music that they're making. And maybe it's more about, it's bringing every music back down to earth and back to a connection between us and having something momentary as not so much something that just stays. And I think in generative music it's also the case. Music is always kind of changing, it's always refreshing. So I thought that just an interesting point of connection between.
Can I just share one crazy use case for music? There's this startup in the States that lets you create music on their website very quickly. It's an AI music startup. And the founder was talking about, you know, people using this to create tracks and use it in their track production. But the thing that people were using it most for that they didn't expect, at least in the early stages, was on Twitch. There were gamers who were trolling each other every time someone won or lost a game, and they would make a quick track as a clip to troll the other person when they lost. It was the most bizarre thing. No one understood it because no one hangs out on Twitch all day. But it was, I kind of got it. A lot of kids do this. Like they create ways to troll each other. But trolling in this sense is in the game environment. I mean, this is like, that could be a whole new industry, right? Who knows? Anyway, I'll stop talking. Who wants to?
It's like, I think there's sort of progress from what you guys said to from the startup app development, specifically app development ecosystem, because there is this discrepancy between what you do as a professional producer with a truckload of equipment versus Playground, which, for example, is an amazing app. It's super intuitive. It's really, really fun. But I wanted to ask you, and basically everybody else, how do we bridge these things? Because I personally, I've looked at a lot of iOS apps, which are amazing. A lot of Moog has synthesizers. There are sequencers. There's a truckload of stuff that really brings these innovative surfaces together and just lets us create stuff on this tiny platform. But then I have this huge studio or the stage that I perform on. What do you think is the next step between that and actually the professional? Because if I can just produce music and release it from the app, that's never, well, I'm not going to say never, but for the next foreseeable future, for me at least, it's not going to have the quality of a full-on studio production, like the mixdown alone. Especially with generator stuff, you can't automate a mixing engineer. Somebody like Tom sitting there, he has skills that I don't think that they are machine learnable for at least the next couple of years. So how do we go from there to the big releases? What do you think?
Just one quick, does lo-fi hip-hop sound as good as Will I Am?
Subjective question. Subjective question. Does lo-fi hip-hop sound as good as Will I Am?
Does video game music sound worse than, I don't know, it's like, I think it's all
Depends on
about
the
the
game.
feeling that it gives you.
Yeah, it
Depends
depends on
on the
video
video
game, because
game.
you have like AAA video games that have like
Yeah.
Like 80s video games. I mean,
Alright.
there's whole genres of music that are
Yeah,
like
8-bit music.
around sounding bad.
Yeah.
Also.
Yeah.
To answer your question,
Yeah.
we don't need new technology to do that. We just need new business model to enable to open up what we already done and make them financially viable without all the barriers that we have to put to keep some walled garden and monetization in place. Because when you were saying that the instruments are getting dumber, they are, but in a way the instrument is no more just the controller on your table, it's your whole studio which becomes the instrument. So the instruments in itself became way bigger and it became a network of different parts, computers, people, maybe an iPad or a dumb controller or something that you hack yourself with a little bit of Arduino and electronics. And that's becoming the instruments. And all the technology that we need to make everything works together, they are there for more than 40 years now. That's standards dating back from the 80s. And then we can still use like MIDI, and there are more advanced stuff like OSC and this stuff. I won't nerd out too much, but everything already exists, and we just have to open up the barriers. And I don't remember who was talking about Link, Ableton Link earlier. That's exactly the kind of technology that let everyone connect stuff and interconnect stuff, and you just need audio jacks and MIDI cables, and you can do that.
I think often all this technique is totally overrated. It's my personal opinion, because I mean, there was brilliant music in the 60s, in the 80s, in the 90s now, and it's always the person who creates something, and it's the person who listens. And half of all the listening experience, or half of the music is actually the listening experience. What the person, how he dives into it, it's happening in your head. So, you know, and the same thing happens while creating things. And you can have all these fancy apps of the whole world, but it doesn't mean that you create 1 minute of good music, which is interesting, which is emotionally touching someone. So.
Just wanted to add a thing here. Yeah, I think like that's a great point. But I believe like what apps like Jungle are doing is also like opening up like the stage to people who are not necessarily like professionals there. So obviously most of that music, most likely it's not gonna hit the charts for sure, but it's gonna be like fully like enjoyable for like the people who produce that music and for the people who like they share that music with. And obviously like we don't expect like for AI music, or AI aided like music, like amateurs like to hit the charts or like to be like the, I don't know, like the next big thing, right? But it's just like opening up possibilities, and it's just like giving opportunity to people to express themselves through music, even if that music is not necessarily going to be like the best music in the world, right?
That's why I think that I don't really see that this is sort of a replacement, but rather kind of like targeting a new group of people. You know,
Oh yeah,
I mean,
it was a replacement.
no, but I mean that's why I think it's actually super relevant to have kind of like these apps which people might use. Well, like a music producer might use this because it's fun, but might not create the next hit with this app. But you know, it kind of like creates a common ground between people who, like maybe before, you, as you say, you think I can't do music, and then it's actually so easy to use. And I think it builds bridges between people who are maybe a professional and people who are interested but can't really express themselves. And now these technologies actually enable people to do so. And then I think it creates more of a bridge than barriers.
Okay, so counter question to that, also for you guys. let's say we have 10,000 people who use Playground and Django apps. How do you tell who made which beat aside from the fingerprinting? I mean, like musically, because you're creating a set of constraints, like you're creating an interface. Like with a guitar, there is slightly, for example, with a guitar, there's slightly more variation. And I'm looking forward to your demo, by the way. But this is like, okay. He's preparing the answer right now. But,
No Wi-Fi here, but I can play like 2 users in my community, one that's just a beginner and one that's a super talented.
Okay,
But I can't.
full disclosure, I don't know his app, so I'm getting ready to get my ass kicked right now.
This is
But
my favorite.
we are creating certain things. You mentioned something about lo-fi, right?
Yeah. Or like, that's like a nice user.
That's a nice user.
That's
Yeah.
a-
They are nice users.
I mean, bit more mechanical, bit less soulful. I just think that saying that you can't express emotion with like, let's say, with new technology or with apps is the same like saying, yeah, you can't express emotion with an electric guitar in the like last century. You know, it's always like there's a feeling that what you have right now is a degradation. But what you have right now, also the change in technology creates completely new ecosystems and completely new genres. And I think part of what technology is not only about that, hey, yeah, now everyone can have instant access to connect with each other around music, but also there's a whole new set of tools that you can, for example, like Link. You could have like a jam session with a few devices playing together, or well, one thing that's mind-blowing for me is like VR, the opportunities in VR for music. You can create any kind of visual interface that you want to interact with.
People have
This was
most of
absolutely
them
not the
are
point.
Okay.
What I meant.
Okay.
It was absolutely not the point. What I meant that technology is shit also. Sometimes it's overrated, but it's always, you have to have a feeling when you use the technology. If you don't have a feeling for it, if it doesn't touch you, nothing will come out of it. And there's a huge market around this. Look all the music magazines. Look all the modular community. And then look how many people are there who actually make good music with that. It's just a small percentage. And this is what I mean. It's, I love technology. I really love technology. I'm totally for it. But you always have to have the connection and the expression, the feeling, the emotion, and then you can transport something. And this can be a stone or the latest app or whatever.
Yeah,
That was
I think
absolutely not my
comment
point.
He's looking at you like he wants
Yeah,
to
I want
jump
to
into
reply, but it's not. You're not always making music to communicate something to others. Sometimes you make
Yeah, to
music
yourself.
just to yourself.
But you have to
and
feel it, yeah.
And you don't have to be good at it to feel. And
Absolutely not.
that will-
You have to feel something.
Yeah, you have to feel something, and you can feel something as simply by humming something or just singing in your head,
Right.
or just using very badly a guitar or playing with electronic instruments or anything. It's not. You don't have to make something that is meaningful to others. Or something that
absolutely
is
not.
new or creative, but just something that you feel good. And it's like if you are going to the gym, you don't necessarily make it to make you make it to feel better, or you make it because you want to express something about your lifestyle. But it's two different things. And those are valid points.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, sorry we vilified you, I guess, because it was, the way you said it was something like, what the fuck?
I don't want to vilify you.
Music is that good? You don't like that?
Absolutely not.
No, definitely not. Like, so we're not vilifying anyone here. Personally, I'm just curious where this is all going. For example, Playground, I've seen it at a couple of trade shows now. I see people interact with it, and it's a fantastic new thing. And I'm really looking forward to you guys sort of helping us bridge the gap between like a full-on installation or something, so that like Kalam said, that we can also control visuals with it and just make the whole experience, not just the creation and performance, but also the consumption, create a sort of feedback loop between that. We've been talking for a while now. Are there any questions in the audience? I mean,
Yeah, like questions like 10 minutes in my mind is Like since right now, like the creators are not centralized anymore. Like there is like everyone can basically be a musician and like just using your app or your app. So we are looking at like at decentralizing, creating music basically. So where do you think this is going? Are we talking about like the mini influencers, but like the mini musicians? I don't know, like where is this going, do you think? And do you think that the people who they are like the classic musicians or the people who have spent like the half of their lives doing this are like kind of concerned about this because they're like kind of being pushed off the track?
You get that all the time from DJs. Like this, since DJing became democratized, it's like, oh my God, the sync button. And anybody with experience tell you, it's going to tell you, it's not about the sync button, it's about the music that you play. But the question was, I think, directed at you.
Yeah, sorry, I guess for...
Or both of you.
Well, one thing, I don't think it would ever replace real musicianship. It would probably make it more valuable because everyone can use the technology and not everyone's going to spend time. And it might actually create like a much more value in actually learning an instrument and learning the basics. But as you were asking about like for musicians, as for like making a living out of it, I think like unfortunately like today to really monetize your art in any kind of field, you need to use a whole variety of digital platforms. And I think, well, for example, for us, what we are thinking about is like a total vertical that like it's the instrument, it's the studio, it's also the stage, it's also the platform, it's the label, it's like the whole thing. So if you're just starting and you want like to progress into music and you're like a 13-year-old that wants to sell beats online because he can't get a job yet. One of our users has a shop on Instagram and trying to sell the beats that they made in the gym. So we could facilitate that whole journey. And I think as we grow also as a product, it can become deeper and deeper and richer till we can actually make decent quality music and also monetize it through this platform. Now, it could be great for the person that's just beginning, but it can also be an amazing way for established musicians that already have an audience. A lot of musicians don't enjoy really taking selfies in the backstage and communicating with the audience in a visual way, or like they're not necessarily witty or funny, they're like grungy or whatever. But if, especially electronic musicians that had a way to communicate with their fans in a musical way and have a musical dialogue, so they make some collection of samples from their last track, and they collaborate with their audience through an app that can enrich also and give new opportunities also for established musicians to utilize this platform.
Yeah, so you're basically your method of interacting with music becomes a release platform, which I think you guys are planning as well, right? So I've seen this in VR as well. I'm not sure, anybody played VR in this room?
Like what?
One, two, the couple of people.
VR?
Yeah, so there's a game called Beat Saber, which is basically Guitar Hero in VR, and it's also becoming a release platform for people to make their own music more interactive for the consumer. So I think this is a very direct, very
TikTok is interactive. TikTok is a nice thing. I mean, it is interactive. It's not music creation, but it's also gonna be there for sure.
I don't see it as a problem either, because we are helping people understanding music, and most of you are listening to a lot of music without being a musician, and you miss out half of the discourse. And just train a little bit your ear and be able to, just because you play some things and you become more integrated and you can enjoy music in a deeper way. And I think it's something really valuable for the artist at the end.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Any more questions from the audience? So let me just walk over to you. Ladies first.
Hi, thank you for all your cool insights, and it's a very interesting topic for me. I'm a DJ, so I was thinking about everything you were discussing, and it's a lot about facilitating creation of music for non-music users. My son, I should show him Jamble, definitely. He's trying to make money from making beats with GarageBand. But what can I learn? What can I learn through making music other than being a star or making a great experience, a creative experience for something else? That would be my first question. If you've thought about that.
What can you learn?
What can I learn from creating music other than expressing my emotion? I think there's lots you can learn through making music. And since kids aren't really playing instruments anymore, and apps are quite easy, I was interested in your
So
answers to that.
maybe you can hold on to this mic for everybody else who has questions. You guys just hand this one back and forth.
I think expressing your emotion is already a very, very big win and very worth it, beside learning anything else on top of it.
Yeah, and for me, it's also like music is kind of like a language in itself. It's just like opening up like new opportunities to understand the world. Because at the end of the day, you are dealing with a language and a very complex one. And even like this apps or playground, like or Jambo, so you have to think like really, really wisely about how to put like, together, for example, like a bit, and like that in itself, I think like it's an amazing exercise. So
Yeah, I think finally, from my point of view, creating music is actually what you learn is being creative. And I think one misperception quite often is I'm either creative or I'm not, and I think it's not true. I think you can really learn to be creative, and that's why we also really try to bring kind of companies, old school German companies, together with artists. And actually for them, of course, it's kind of weird, because like, how can a musician or whatever artist solve a business problem? But it's actually about being creative, like how can you be creative? And I think that's something that a lot of people lack, and it's something that you can actually train by being creative. And I think these kind of like methods can be something that you learn from this.
Now, also the thing is, if you work within a constrained interface, something very simple, like if you go back in history and get like a synthesizer from the 80s, it forces you to be incredibly creative with what you've got. Because nowadays you have synthesizers that can create pretty much anything you want. But something very simple sort of teaches you to improvise, to try to break the boundaries of what you've got in Genius, just to evolve within, to work within a set of constraints. And I think it's a very valuable skill for a musician to have.
Yeah, I share a lot of what you guys are saying here. I think one thing that I see that is not well articulated is the intersection with music and code, the mathematical aspects of music. I think music for kids, it's on one level expression, but as you get into more complex stuff like trying to code up or create something that can code up music, for example, you go into a learning pathway that is much more interesting when you're doing it from a music perspective. How do I create some code that makes some music? How do I throw some samples to sample R and come out with something amazing? You have to go through a lot of statistical probabilities, trying to understand stuff. It's not that far off for kids, depending on the age, but I think when they're starting to get interested in the world around them and what music means to them, to suddenly throw in the whole mathematical and code aspect can really open up some interesting ways of looking at the problem. I see this more on the adult side with neural networks. We have a couple of creative technologists and artists working with the leading coders in machine learning who've created some amazing stuff in the last year. And I see within this little space that we have a shared language that has come out of talking to artists and creative technologists, how they use machine learning. That means that when I share the ideas, like, hey, you know that guy, like I can say the guy right now, hey, you know that guy who created the death metal with neural, you guys all nod your head, you know what I'm talking about. I don't have to explain the crazy weird stuff that they actually did. I think this is something that I find is challenging in larger companies where there are huge gaps of knowledge into what these new things are. What is machine learning? How do I explain what machine learning is, what blockchain is? But you talk about the guy who created death metal with machine learning, and you can suddenly get over the idea. It's like, you know how they did the style transfer? They got the bands thing, they got it into the AI, generated this thing, and people really got into it, got a million hits on YouTube. Suddenly you've got people, you've got them understanding what the potential is. And I feel artists have a huge role to play in shining the light in terms of what you can do with these technologies and where you can take them. We've got a lot of science fiction, we've got a lot of people writing about AI taking over, taking our jobs, killing off people who do mastering. stream and things like that. It's not happening. There's a whole middle ground that is completely unexplored. And one thing that I find fascinating right now is we have people, there's a whole generation of people who have grown up in open tech stacks with access to research online, with models they can work with, where they can just start. And that was the hardest thing a long time ago. You had to find the person to get, there was so many hurdles. And this is where we are right now. And this is why we see these kinds of artists working across multiple disciplines. Where this goes, it's really open. But I feel that they have a huge role to play in helping us figure out what we're going to do with all this stuff, or what not to do with it. One thing that has come out is I think we all agree, AI is super fucking primitive right now, right? It's just like the machine learning stuff, but it's super exciting because unsupervised machine learning chucks out stuff that you don't expect sometimes, and that really provokes, and that makes you think. So I guess not everyone's working these areas here, but it's just, I'd like to just point out that the role of the artist is not to create a track in Spotify. Sometimes it's helping us see things in ways that we weren't considering before. In regards to your question about where this could go, there's social content creators right now. They've got all kinds of weird needs to like grow audiences and things like that didn't exist a few years ago. So that could be one aspect. There are other areas where sonic representation of data helps us figure out where the anomalies are. There's so many applications for like where music can go today because the tools for making it have been opened up, democratized, as some would say. But I'd say it's still highly complex to make good music. It's hard to create something that captures people. And when I talk to music producers who've done that successfully, they tell me it's not about getting everything in order. Sometimes it's about the glitches. It's about the mistakes that open up new ways of seeing, new ways of thinking. That's something tech does. It always creates glitches, and that's why we get all these fascinating genres like drum and bass, and even now maybe we have whole new genres around AI music. Fuck knows. But it's just like we're in a very interesting time. There's a lot of room to experiment, and working alongside artists or working with these tools, we start to see new ways of using this stuff and new ways of sharing what we're doing with it. I think that has some value both to kids and to companies who are like the deep tech accelerator here. They might have better data models to think about when they look at if they try and paraphrase what machine learning does in some cases, which is basically over-glorify autocomplete. It's like it's trying to figure out what the next sound should be with some of these generative algorithms. You guys did something totally different. I'm not going to get into that, but I think it's super interesting to hear what you've done and contrast that with all these other approaches. And for the last year, this for me has been the most fascinating deep dive into anything because it's so open-ended, so many possibilities, and so many opportunities to explore new forms of expression, new ways of building audiences, and new ways of monetizing it. I think that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, you made I think a really good point that you mentioned 2 or 3 times is that there needs to be a catalyst for this, for learning these things, and that is the artist, that is the performer, that is you guys coming up with new ways to inspire the people around you to actually take this tech and use it. That's kind of what we do at Sample Music Festival. We bring these people together to communicate, hey, there is this new thing, here's what it does, touch it. Because that's often the most important step is the first one, is where you overcome that thing where you, I don't know how this works, I don't want to embarrass myself. No, just get in here, push this button. And these people are incredibly important as catalysts for the industry as well. The people who are not afraid to push that button or sort of touch the glass. So yeah, you have the mic. There were other questions. Would you mind
have the
having?
mic, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, first of all, thank you for your amazing insights. For me, both having input in machine learning as well as making music, the old-fashioned way of playing instruments, I would find it very interesting to hear maybe a little bit more specific about the fields of applications for machine learning algorithms in music, or maybe on what level it will take place. Would it be on like you have one slider for making a drum beat and it's like, should it be aggressive or not aggressive? Or is it maybe a more specific tool, or just what you have in mind, maybe a bit more specific to the applications of it? Thank you.
Yeah, so there are a bunch of different applications really. So, and if we just confine ourselves to the generative side of things, there one thing we were working on was like generating music for video games, which in itself like is a very difficult problem because like the music that we generate is generated in real time, and so it changes depending on the emotional the narrative of whatever like you are doing like, in the game itself. So that, for example, like is a huge like application, and it comes with a lot like of technical hurdles there. But then very interesting applications as well are the ones where you are actually aiding the composer to like create like some music, and that can come like in different like shapes and forms. So, for example, there was a very famous researcher in generative music who, during the 80s, this guy is a composer. So he had a writer's block. So what he figured out was, okay, so I'm going to build a machine, and I'm going to teach this machine the way I create music. So this machine can spit out some music in my style, and I can use like those like ideas as a way of like getting into I don't know, like new compositions and things like that. So you can use like machine learning or like AI or in general like for these types of applications. So it's just like just giving some initial ideas. So it could be melodies, it could be like chord progressions, but it could be also more a kind of like professional approach in the sense that I have a melody and I want to like orchestrate that melody, or I want to like create an arrangement around that. So it's like many levels really. And many of these things, the majority, if not all of them, haven't been like solved like at all. The technology itself like is quite immature, even though like over the last 5 years, thanks to like this amazing like startups and startup environment, like we've done a lot of progress in the space, but still we're definitely like not at par with like human composers by any means. So this is a challenge that we're gonna I don't know, like we need like to push more like in this direction, and it's going to take probably like another 5 years, 10 years, who knows really. And that's like the very interesting stuff.
Thank you.
Okay, next person with a question. Would you mind handing over?
Can I,
Oh, sorry.
1 second on the use cases around machine learning music. So I can just speak to what people have done. I've seen one, I guess, well-known Berkheim resident working with the developer who created a way to analyze his music library and train recommendation algorithm. So many words here. Basically, he's taken his music library and said, okay, this is the kind of music I like to play. Train the algorithm to detect that. And then put another library against it, so then you can select tracks from that. What that helps me to do is, instead of taking 2 days to create a playlist, a set list, set list in a club setting, it takes half a day. So that's something. But again, it's working alongside someone who can abstract out what you need to do to actually create this sort of system, and then create it. I don't think you can just pick things up off the shelf, and you're very right to say there's so many applications out there that are waiting to be made. I think what we have is an understanding that you have something that you can train on a lot of data, and it might spit out something useful, it might not, might help you figure out what's the right level for your reverb, might not, no, but I think these applications will come, and it might be, you might have applications that are customized to your way of making music or performing music. That might be the most interesting thing that comes out of it. But it's not something that is going to develop overnight. I feel like there needs to be a lot of research on this, and maybe you need to work with someone who's a machine learning developer and conceptualize what it is you want to experiment with, and it's through those experiments these applications might come up. So yeah, so that's why it's interesting.
One of the interesting things I think is also managing the library of sounds that you have, because if you're maybe use something like Native Instruments Complete or something, where you have, I don't know, 1 terabyte of sample content at this point, it takes, I don't know, a single person who has listened to all the presets. And there are some categories which are made by humans. If we can, within our own production environment, teach our assistant to help us filter the 200,000 kick drums that I have, and just pick me, like statistically, help me pick the ones that I use most frequently that fit a certain style. Things like these, oh man, or like what you said about the DJ libraries. That's exactly that. Because it kind of is a DJ's job to make these things. But for example, I don't know about you, but if I go shopping for tracks, I listen to 3,000. I put 40 in the cart and I sleep over, and I buy half of that. That's the ratio of something I consider good to something I consider bad. I'm not gonna just, you know. But if we can simplify this, this would be super cool, right?
I just wanted to help out the non-technical people here and just say that what this means is that people are still going to be making music for a very, very long time. And the technology is just going to help with small steps along the way to make it a bit easier, give us suggestions, give us unique samples that we can play with, help us curate our music, help us find the samples that we want. But humans are still going to be in the driver's seat to make music for people to listen to for a very, very long time. I think at least until we have general intelligence, then it's a different story. It's a world war.
Yeah, so just like a point here, well, you may not need general intelligence for that. So I remember reading a very interesting book by a logician, and this book was like from the 70s, Little Lecture Back. So he was talking about AI, and at the time it was like very, very primitive. And he was saying that we're going to see a machine beating the world chess champion like only when we reach like general intelligence. It turns out that we didn't need like, general intelligence for that, right?
Right, but the difference is, I think the difference is that you would, to compare it, you would to compare it to making music. Well, you already have the chess and you have the rules. I think like AI definitely can compose and write some MIDI, but to also produce, mix, find the samples, master it. Like it's like asking the one that beat the Kasparov to actually go down, chop some wood, make the chess pieces, and create the board. So I think.
Yeah, well, but it's a complex problem, but you can just like chop it up, like divide and conquer, right? So you just like divide it up into a number of lesser problems, and you're trying to solve it that way. And by the way, there's a lot of like research, like obviously like in the generative music space, and some experiments have been done where like people weren't really like capable of distinguishing like between human-made and machine-made music. Now, obviously that music wasn't like performed, neither like produced like by a machine. But I mean, we're getting there, but this is not really the point. Just like in chess, even though we have like super chess players, computer players that would beat anyone on this planet, but we're still are going to play chess. It's going to happen probably like the same thing with music, because we have this intrinsic instinct like to express ourselves, and that whether like we have machines who can create like, amazing music or not, that's not going to change.
Okay, so there are more questions. Can you hand the mic?
Hi. So Valeria, you just said right then that there might come a time where people are unable to distinguish between human-made and machine-made music. And the issue I have with that statement is that it suggests that humans are only connecting to music on a sonic level, whereas I think music is an advanced form of communication. I highly doubt that anyone listening, or that everybody listening to Kanye West is listening to it on the merit of its like kind of sonics.
Yeah.
They're listening to it because they want to be part of the tribe. Do you believe that like, machine-made music will ever be at the same level of like, communication?
I think this is a great point, and I wrote a blog post just about this. And this was like the whole point why like musicians like, in general shouldn't be scared like of AI music generation at all, because like the experiencing like listening to music is not just the music itself as well, like the music like points to, and what you said is the connection with the artist, knowing like what this person, for example, has been through, you know, his or her life, and there's all of that aspect, which makes music like way more complex than just like, well, I'm creating the notes and I'm producing like these notes, right? So in that sense, this is yet another reason why we're not going to have like machines who are going to replace like human composers. Perhaps like the most like dumb stuff, like for example, writing like music for ads, who like composers like sometimes like do like in these days, but I mean it's not the most exciting thing ever. So more like functional music that I can see like an application, for example, for YouTube videos, right?
Yes, me too.
Yeah, kind of like that kind of like functional music, but for actual like absolute music, let's call it that way. No, we don't feel like that risk.
So until we have actual artificial intelligence and Skynet, we're all going to die. Machines are going to help, but they're not going to replace actual musicians, right? I think that's the consensus here. Can we?
Yeah. Hi. Thanks a lot for the insights. I'm actually coming from a business perspective, and we have been focusing the discussion a lot regarding the production of music facilitated by technologies and AI. And I wonder, like in this digital world, and you have so many, as said, like tracks produced overnight or over a weekend. What kind of skills can musicians or their teams equip themselves with to be heard among this digital world? I mean, it's extremely difficult to make money with streaming, and yeah.
Make people dance.
Okay.
Go to a place where there's people, make them dance. If you got that, if you make a lot of people dance, you're fine.
Well,
Yeah, that's exactly. This is a horrible story because I'm an ambient musician, so I'm doing experimental ambient since ages, and people are not conscious about their hearing process. And if you can make them dance, they're always excited. You know, the louder, the more beats, the better. And but it's so easy. And
you know what I have? Sorry, I just one more thing besides making people dance, which answers your question. The dilemma, being part of a scene, I think is very, very helpful if you're starting in music. Having a supportive scene, even if it's something small, connecting directly to the right people, starting small. I think making people dance is helpful. But if you're doing ambient and there's an ambient scene in your town, cool. If not, go to a different town and there's an ambient scene.
You have to go to a different town in this day and age. But the thing is, if we had to divide this between maybe technical skill, network/community, and just pure luck, how would you guys divide the percentage? Because I think that's basically what you're asking, right?
I wouldn't count on luck. I mean, you could end up like little Max, but what are the chances?
but actually, there's a lot of luck. I mean,
Luck is just being
involved, right?
yeah, you have to present yourself in places. You have to connect up with people, show yourself. Network is the thing. I think it's having a scene. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you guys maybe all say something about this? Because I'm really curious myself as well. Because everybody will have a different take on it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we've kind of talked about a lot about kind of like high quality music, low quality music, what's good music, what's bad music, and that's why I don't really agree with the chess comparison, because for being successful, it doesn't really matter if it's good or high quality music, and music is not a game of chess. You don't beat anyone at music necessarily. So basically something that's crap can be successful, and something that's really good can be never heard. So that's why I think it's not a game of chess necessarily. And of course there's a lot of other factors, luck maybe one, but as I think maybe one of the most important ones is actually community, and maybe it may be following a tribe, but I think it can be talking to other artists to get more inspiration yourself, but also getting a community around you. And so I think you also won't really improve your own skills when you just kind of sit in the studio alone. So I think interacting with others, building a community as an artist is essential.
The question is how to be successful in the music tech space? Is that it?
In the music space.
Music space.
I would say more of like how to market your production and market your product in general, you know, among these digital platforms and also offline, online, and make money?
Yeah. Well, I think you have to just work backwards from where your audience is. If you're a music tech company, you're selling to people who use that stuff to make music, so you have to create something very high quality that can last a very long time. If you're working on engaging people on the screen to have a bit of fun and then move along the journey and create a great app experience. For me, it's really about audience development more than anything else, because this is really broad. The one thing that I would say you shouldn't do is get too hung up on music. I think people are really passionate in this space, and sometimes that can cloud your judgment with regards to what works and what doesn't. I don't think the people who started Musical.ly, TikTok, or Calm were starting with the point like, oh, it's a music app. It just ended up becoming a music app because there was an interesting interaction they were able to tap into. And Calm as an app is also quite interesting because it's a way for artists to reach an audience, even as an ambient artist. That might be your target audience. That might be the way for your path to success by cutting a deal with them. I think you have to really open up your mind to what the possibilities are and why people listen to your music or what they use it for in this space. And that really comes down to thinking about who your audience is. It's textbook stuff, but I think that's really what it is. And it might take a long time.
Yeah, especially today when if you're getting in any sort of online content game, it's going to be hard. It's 2020. If you wanted to start a career on YouTube or wherever else, pushing your content individual, work with people. Like place if you know a vlogger you love, give them your sound. You know, just network this way. Maybe get your stuff placed through channels that have a bigger exposure than yourself. That's like one of the approaches, but there are so many answers to this. I would suggest that we take a break now, about 30 minutes. You guys continue this discussion among ourselves, so there's no need for us all to sit here on display. And we'll get back later at 9:30 for individual presentations of the things these guys are doing. Thank you very much for listening.